So, Rebecca, we're back in lockdown again, and
So
we
tired.
are podcasting from afar again over Zoom. Let's talk about Encanto, and also I want to talk about some parenting questions that some patrons emailed in. What do you say, Rebecca?
What else am I
This
going to do today?
patron Ashley from Nacogdoches, Texas, says, would you please watch Disney Encanto and give us your thoughts from a psychology perspective? I saw this movie expecting it to be something to pass the time with the kids, but instead ended up in tears through several parts of the movie. This movie was so beautiful and validating and felt so spot on as someone who came from generational trauma, going no contact with my parents for over 2 years,
Hmm.
and now finally in therapy with them. Every day since I've seen it, I've been dying to hear your thoughts and know many others on the Facebook fan page would as well. So, Rebecca, what are your overall thoughts on this movie before we get into kind of the specifics?
So I saw it. I loved it. I'm trying to get every client to watch it. I can't stop talking about it. And I think that one of the coolest things that they've done is that there's no traditional Disney villain.
Hmm.
The villain is the intergenerational trauma itself, which is just so gorgeous.
Yeah.
And it has two of my favorite actors are in it, and yeah, can't wait. Want to hear your thoughts?
Well, I had been primed to think it would be a terrible movie because Umberto, Colombian himself,
Uh-huh.
reported to me that he didn't really like it. He thought it was fine. He didn't hate it, but it didn't really resonate with him like Moana or Inside Out or other kinds of movies of this ilk. And so when I was watching it, I had very low expectations, and I uh, so I'll tell you the evolution of my sort of reaction to this movie. As I was watching it, I enjoyed it. I thought it wasn't as bad as what Umberto was painting it to be. And then at the end, but as I'm watching it, I'm kind of confused and not really picking up. Maybe I'm too stupid or something, but I wasn't really comprehending what the message was until the very, very end. And I was like, okay. And then I then thought the movie wasn't that great because I was confused. And then people kept emailing me and like, I don't think I've ever had a movie where people wanted me to talk about. And if I
Mm.
hadn't known, probably wouldn't have talked about it because it's, to me, it's just another, enjoyable movie, I suppose. But then I started thinking, okay, why are people wanting me to talk about this movie so much? And I gave it some thought some more. And then I actually rewatched it and enjoyed it a lot better the second time around because I knew what the vibe of the movie was, what the
Mhm.
message was, and I picked up on the messaging as it was unfolding much more readily the second time around, and enjoyed it a lot. I will say the first time I watched it, I cried several times. The grandma flashback at the
Mm.
end is up there with the beginning of Up. I mean,
Mhm.
it is
Sub factor
powerful,
10.
powerful nonverbal uh, storytelling, while this beautiful song about butterflies and
And I don't know if you know that, at least in Mexican culture, the mariposa butterfly is a symbol of self, but also a symbol of migration. That
mm,
the monarch butterflies are free to go back and forth, and so there's like tremendous cultural reference going on.
yeah. And Berto talked about that as a Colombian. He was saying that he saw the several little, shall we say, Easter eggs of Colombian culture that are sprinkled throughout, and he's like, yeah, it's nice, but it felt like it was just sort of pasted onto the movie. That was his approach. Who knows? Um, but now at the end of it all, where I'm at with the movie is I almost kind of want to watch it a third time.
We should watch it together.
We could, well, once the pandemic is officially over. I will say from the beginning, I noticed how masterful the animators are and voice actors are at creating so much comedy and communication and body language. I mean, the facial expressions and the little nuances to the flip of the hair or a little flick of the shoulder or something. It was incredible to watch. And because, these animators, they spend months on like the same 5 seconds, right? Like tweaking this movement and making sure the voice acting is synced up. And so there's that. The other thing that it resonated with me is the large extended family. Is my Japanese side of the family has a similar vibe to their family, where family is family and you call people aunts and uncles and cousins that aren't really aunts and uncles and cousins. I mean, there wasn't that element in the movie, but the feeling of intergenerational awareness and respect and kind of where you fit in. There's a lot of awareness in my Japanese side of the family of like where you fit in the, I don't know how to describe it, but like the roles, everyone, like the very first grandchild is my cousin, and she actually listens to this podcast on my white side. Anyway, point is I really I really liked that part of it.
Well, and then, I mean, it's funny because I come from this teeny tiny family. I'm the only kid of a generation. And I remember when I worked at Asian counseling and like people's family systems were so big and I would just get confused. And I had that same feeling when they break into the second stanza of the first song as she starts talking about the grandchildren. And I'm like, oh God,
Yeah.
there's a whole other set. And then there's that one grandchild that can transform into everybody. And so that one had me lost. I'm like, I don't even know who he is. But that I loved that through the movie, especially some of the female characters, their magic becomes so important, or the fact that they don't want to do their magic becomes really important.
Right. Yeah. So let's get into the systems theory and the multi-generational trauma aspect of this. What were your thoughts on that, Rebecca?
I'm just bringing up my cheat sheet so I can remember everybody's name. What is so beautiful is that, and this lovely painful metaphor for immigration, is that the grandmother is on her own, which for so many of us, that is the family narrative. That's my family narrative. The grandmother arrives on her own and has to make things work. And lucky for her, there is this magic. But I think, the metaphor there is it's just the skills that everybody brings to the family. And then some of those skills work in the family. Some of those skills make it hard for the family. Some of those skills are so important that the family relies on it. So like the beautiful child, everybody wants her to be that, even though she carries on, even though she doesn't want to do that. So that's what really struck me, was that the places that people get stuck in because the family system needs them to be that in order to survive.
Right. Yeah. It's such a common thing in family therapy that we talk about, and obviously it informs my work with individuals as well, that our solutions of the past, either in our own lives or in our lineage, were necessary at the time, but then get retained into the present, where they actually are no longer as or even necessary at all, and create a lot of problems. And the underpinnings, the rules that dictate these patterns and ways of thinking or seeing or behaving are ingrained in us, right? The grandma was, she saw death, she gives birth to these 3 kids, and then her husband gets murdered by these
junta
bandits, and they are probably going to kill her as well, or she's going to, and the other people who are fleeing are also probably going to experience strife and death, perhaps. But her pain is magical, and it creates these walls like a valley, and then it creates this house and this candle that it's like, here is our special place. Did you interpret it that way, that her pain created the valley that they live in as well? Because these mountains kind of come up.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about it just in terms of the story of my own family, which is that, you come with nothing and you have to make something.
Yeah.
So my great grandmother had a grocery store in the west side of Chicago that served as a house. They lived in the back. Like you take what you have and you make it into a home in the new land that is safe. So yes, magical
Yeah.
realism. And
Right.
also
There was
Latin
that.
American literature has this history of magical realism.
Yeah.
Like, of course this happens, right?
Right.
Like there's no like, why would that not happen?
Right. And it often emerges from emotion, right? Like I think of what's the
Like water for chocolate.
yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
water. I used to assign that book to my students because there's actually a lot of systemic family systems ideas. When I think about my own family, my great grandparents, Japanese grandparents, came over to Washington from Japan. And because of racism and poverty, the only jobs available to them were often not very well paying, farmers or servants. My great grandfather actually was a servant in Portland, Oregon for a while, apparently to a lovely family. So there's that, white family, of course. And but a lot of farmers and a lot of hardworking railroad laborers working at a vegetable plant. My grandfather, my dad's father, worked 2 full-time jobs because, well, I won't go to the details, but he had to pay off a debt of someone else that he was sort of saddled with. And but the and it arguably, it debatable, but it could have killed him. My grandfather died relatively young in his 60s and was ill in his last 10 years and just worked him to the bone. The next generation, my father's generation, what we call the not the Nisei but the Sansei generation, they were pushed and given the opportunity to actually have professional jobs. And so there's a lot of engineers, a lot of Boeing, and my dad worked at Boeing, these very kind of solid career jobs that aren't necessarily an expression of your personality, right? It's make sure you have a good solid job, and you stay at that job and you're loyal to that job, and you don't think about what you want necessarily. You think about stability and for your kids, and so you can provide. And then my generation comes along, the Yonsei generation, 4th generation, and we're like, well, I want to think about me.
I'm an artist.
Yeah. And so, here I am, like 17 years old, and I'm not really thinking about my career, and I'm playing guitar all the time and writing music in my room. And it's just frustrating my father, and I remember he was trying, I was being absolutely a snot as a 17-year-old, and he's trying to, I don't know, he was trying to do with me, trying to get me to do something. And I remember him saying just something along the lines of, "You're just in your room playing that guitar all the time." And my family didn't yell at each other, so that was kind of a big thing to happen in my life. I didn't feel threatened at all. I didn't feel like, I felt like, well, I mean, yeah, that's what I am doing, and it probably isn't very productive. But that's the rule underlying all this is things could fall apart. And then of course you have in that story, you have the American government locking up those people. The first
They know
generation.
they can lose everything.
Right. Just because the government decides to imprison you and your family, kids and grandparents and everyone. And the rule is and it's a common to Encanto, is danger is around every corner. And if you think about yourself, and if I allow you to think about yourself as an elder, I'm actually participating in your destruction. And so I need to, there's room for self-expression, there's room for exploration, but but not at the expense of your duty and what is dependable and what is productive. And so it's my duty to stamp that out of you because I
shame
love
you and contain you,
right,
so
because
that you will provide for us.
Well, and I love you so much. I don't want you to suffer. I don't want your kids to suffer. And so I'm going to shame and shame and shame. But as a generation that grows up far from that strife, like my generation had, then it doesn't resonate. We don't understand why we're being yelled at. We don't understand why we're being shamed. We don't understand why we're being told we're being impertinent or irresponsible or wrong. And this movie depicts that extremely well.
So I have two versions of that story. One is my grandmother, as I was so proud of myself, graduating from the Evergreen State College with a bachelor's in women's studies and art practicum. And she said to me, "What are you going to do with that?" Little did she know, she didn't live to see me actually live out and have a fine career with just that. But to her, that just made there's no money in that for her. There's no stability. And the other one was when I was decided I was going to go into graduate school. And I asked my dad, should I do creative writing or should I do art therapy? And he said, you should do art therapy because that's a career. He said, writing is a hobby and you can always just do your hobby on the side. And I think that was that same version. And this is a man who had a master's degree in theater direction, but went on to get a second master's degree in special education so that he could have a job later in life. So that idea that like your art will not save you. Don't spend a lot of money on your art. I think is definitely part of the immigrant experience. And actually, Saturday Night Live did a hysterical piece on this. I don't know if you saw it, where it's an African family and a white Anglo-American family gathering together and talking about what their kids are going to do in college. And when the kid said he's going to be a poet, they just lose their minds. So, these patterns play out over and over and over again.
Right. Now, for the record, there is no one more supportive of my musical noodlings than my father and my mother. Whenever I would have a gig of any sort, I would always try to drag everyone I know to fill the seats. And they're by far the number one and number two attendees throughout my life have been my parents. To this day, they still, I played it, in really dive bar-y place like the Blue Moon, all the way to like the Crocodile. And my parents are sitting right there in the front row. So my parents are very supportive of that. Maybe because I never mooched off them as a 23-year-old. I definitely mooched off them until I was 23, that's for sure. But anyway, so I thought that this movie that's why the first time I watched it, I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand the message because the house is falling apart. She doesn't have a power, but well, this is Disney, so her non-power is going to be her power somehow. But how is that going to play out? And then there's like this Bruno who's played by what's his face,
John Leguizamo.
Yeah.
Hello,
whom we've talked about before.
National treasure, John Leguizamo.
Yeah, have you seen his special, his Netflix special, teaching history to his kids or whatever?
Yeah, I've seen it live. I've also bought his latest comic book, and I have 2 signed copies. And when I opened them and showed them to my kid, they freaked out, took them, and went into their room and didn't come out for a really long time.
That's funny.
So he's pretty much a god.
Yeah. I mean, he's up there for me.
Voice of the squirrel in Ice Age,
right?
So it's so funny that he gets to do a second voice actor job that is like has such a different substance to it.
Yeah, and he gives such a specific, funny, interesting, quirky vibe to that voiceover acting, and you could tell that the animators had to deal with his performance because there's certain moments where he's like, he does like little vocalizations that I'm sure wasn't precisely in the script that the animators later, incorporated and actually embodied through their genius animation. But for me, and we've talked about this before, John Leguizamo, I was, I don't know, I was a teenager, and I a lot of my movie watching happened after I would hang out with my friends, and I'd go home, and I didn't want to go to bed. I was a night owl, and I would watch HBO like at 2 a.m. or something. And I turn on HBO, and John Leguizamo has this one man special, this one man comedy thing when he was young. And I'd never heard of him before. And I just found it to be magical. It's the one where he is,
he embodies like 5 people from the neighborhood,
from his neighborhood in New York. Yeah. And I'd never seen, and to this day will probably never be moved in the way that I was. I think I watched it a bunch of times because, HBO will keep showing it. But anyway, so yeah. What do you think of the music, Rebecca?
I loved it. I loved some of it's really complicated, and it takes several listens to get what's going on. The song about Luisa's song about the burdens of being the strong one, I think will be a classic till the end of time. And I heard something, I posted on Facebook, what are people thinking about this movie? And somebody said that they had not expected Luisa's character to be so popular, and they are scrambling to pump out merchandise. So I think it's interesting that the big, strong woman is, a standout, and it's not a character that we ever see. She's not desexualized or sexualized. She just is.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting, but it's both her physical strength, but it's a metaphor that a lot of us can relate to. But like, I had to move the stuff. I had to be the person.
Right. When that happened, when Mirabel helps her to relax and know that she has freedom to choose. She doesn't have to pressure. She doesn't have to give in to the pressure, that she can take care of herself. When that was happening, I thought, what's happening? And then when she goes to her other sister, and they have this huge moment where she becomes more, messy. I don't know what you call, more grungy, or not as Disney princessy as everyone hoped that she would be, as her power would be. I was like, oh, I see where this, I mean, that's like 2/3 into the movie. I'm like, I get where this movie is going. But the one thing I didn't like, that I still don't like about the movie, is everything makes sense, especially if you know kind of the message that I wasn't picking up on the first time. The house crumbles, spoiler alert, the candle goes out, and then I'm thinking, okay, so somehow they have to come around. This is the bottom. This is Luke learning Darth Vader's his father, and he loses his hand. This is the bottom of the dumps for this character and this family. It is all because of her. And I thought, how are they going to pull this out? Because obviously the grandma and Mirabel have to reconcile somehow. And the way that it's written, the way that it plays out, is they both just go to the river and kind of commiserate, and then grandma just comes around. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And Mirabel says, you don't have to be this way anymore, kind of a thing. You gave us so much. Now let us be free. And now I will say, as a caveat to this, that the grandma's character was perfectly realized. I mean, this grandma I believe this person is a real grandma. I mean, the nuances to the facial expressions, the way she would hold her, she does this thing where she will point with the three, she'll put her pointer finger into her thumb, and then she points when she's angry. It just is so grandma, and not every grandma, of course, but the specific nature of that character's realization. But anyway, and the grandma just kind of comes around, even though everything is falling apart. Now you could argue, well, the grandma now realizes like, what's the point? Or I don't know, but I felt like I needed something in there. I needed more. I needed some storyline that was in the background about grandma, how she came around. It felt like it just happened. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I saw it that the house is slowly breaking, and she knows it's breaking, and she knows the community is losing their trust in her, and she doesn't have a lot of choices.
But they didn't let us in on that internal nature of that arc, because her arc is critical to the story. And she is rigid. She is the matriarch, and she needs the house to stay together. The house falls apart all because of Mirabel. Her normal way to deal with this is to get rid of Bruno, to get rid of anything that contradicts the safety of this community and this family is rejected, flat out. And then everything falls apart. You would think that grandma would just be more angry or very depressed or something, but she just says, well, that sucked. I guess everything's different now. And I guess I accept my son, Bruno, and I accept, everything's fine. I just like, how did that happen? I felt like they needed some line in there, or maybe they cut it for time, or I don't know. That was the part that I didn't really.
There could have been a whole dance number about her sorrow.
Right. There should have been like, while
like you and I should write the intern scene.
Yeah. Well, how would it go? What would it be like?
I mean, I think we'd need more of her backstory.
Well, for me,
like,
the first
where
thing
did they come from? Okay, so I got it.
Okay.
The scene, we really don't see where they lived before. So it would be more about her parents, whether it was safe or not, why she chose this husband, all of her hopes and dreams. She has 3 kids at once. That's not really explored. Like, if there's a plot hole for me, it's how does a single woman carry for 3 children in a magical house? Like, there's something there.
Well,
but
go ahead. Well, the thing that pops into my head is earlier on, like halfway through the movie or something, or if halfway through the beginning, she sings a song to herself, maybe to a picture of her dead husband, and she's frustrated with Mirabel, and you hear about how she's scared, and then we see a little beat where she starts to show a little bit of vulnerability, and everyone in the community in the house kind of actually reacts as well, with some fear as well. If she's afraid, then other people are afraid. Mm-hmm. And so she starts to realize, I need to be strong, because that's what has gotten us through the past 60 years of terrible, or 40, 50 years of terribleness, because I don't let my emotions in, and I don't let my sentimentality, and we have to play a role. We have to do our jobs, and everything will be fine if we do that. So some kind of conflict inside of her, some inner Mirabel of herself, but she clamps down, whereas Mirabel lets it out. You know what I mean? There needed to be that element. And then when the house crumbles down, another little moment, it could even just be a couple seconds, where her inner Mirabel says, it's okay. It's gone now. Or I don't know, something that Mirabel could appeal to, in terms of letting out her inner self-expression.
I got it. So the title of the song is Before I Had Magic. And she looks back at her life, because that, I think, is that's what Mirabel represents, right? Is her pre-magical self. And that's why she's so annoyed. If we're going to get Jungian here. Yeah. Start working on that.
So sing it.
I can't sing.
So before we started recording, she explicitly said, I'm not going to sing, so don't make me.
I'll work on it. I'll work on the
We don't talk
lyrics.
about Bruno. No, no, no. That was my favorite song, by the way.
Oh yeah. Well, everyone's singing it. I can't stop singing. It's like a TikTok sensation.
Oh, is it?
Oh yes.
Out of 10, how many
Mm.
Rebeccas out of 10 would you give
Oh.
Encanto?
Well, so 10 for me is Singing in the Rain. So I would give it a 9.
I at first gave it a 6 and then later bumped it up to a 7. As far as idea, I consider it to be a 10 in terms of the psychology. It's a similar powerful psychological message that is wonderfully being, presented to children in a popular form, similar to Inside Out. But in terms of just my enjoyment of the movie as a piece of entertainment, as a movie thing, I'd give it a 6 or a 7. It just, the story just didn't, there were too many moments where, especially in the beginning, even upon watching the second time, where I'm like, why is this scene even in here? I don't why did she go into that one room with the sand and then it
That's Bruno's room.
I know, but it just like with Inside Out,
you out here
with Inside Out, there's no scene that doesn't make sense, that isn't important to the story, and you know exactly why the characters are there. There's never a moment in Inside Out where you're thinking, why are they even going there? What's the purpose of this mission that they're on, other than just to create a mood, right? She enters that room and it's a scary mood because Bruno is the scary thing, but it's like, well, Bruno's not actually that scary. He was rejected, anyway.
But I will say that it's rare that a movie allows for such great conversations in therapy. I'm thinking of the movie A Dangerous Mind allowed me to have tons of great conversations with people about schizophrenia. Inside Out is another one. Stations 11 right now, which we should podcast on, about, how do you make art in the apocalypse? But in terms of having some amazing examples to talk about therapeutic concepts, I mean, I'm talking about it constantly, and I'm begging my clients to watch it. That doesn't happen very often.
Well, let's talk about parenting for a bit. Lorraine from Calgary says, is it bad that my 3-year-old son acts like my helper at my day home? I've been watching your videos on the Plath family. So just chime in here. There is a reality TV show called Welcome to Plathville, which depicts the Plath family. They are a family that was a part of I don't want to say like a cultish religion, and we're very insular. And there are many kids. I think there's, 10 kids or so, who up until recently had very little contact with the outside world. Homeschooled, no computers, no phones, no TV, no video games, just working on the farm. If it was like they were living in another century kind of a thing. Anyway, so then this reality TV show crew shows up and starts to film everyone. And there's the middle kid, I can't remember her name, but she is the helper. And I would talk about parentified kids and the pressure that they're under. And I don't know for her specifically in this family, but they often suffer quite a bit as adults because of the parentification and the pressure that, anyway. So Lorraine is saying, my 3-year-old son acts like my little helper. I run a day home at my house, and my son likes to be my helper and sometimes acts like he's in charge of the younger kids. I am worried he will develop a strange complex because of this, and I am not sure if it is a bad thing he's helping or what I should do. Rebecca, what do you think?
Well, kids often imitate what they see. So he might just be doing the job that he sees you doing. I don't necessarily think it's bad. Can you hear the dog barking?
I can hear Mochi, yeah. I don't think I've ever heard Mochi bark
That's
before.
Winter. That's the baby dog.
Oh.
It probably means well, let's see. I don't know what it means yet. So I would say it's not necessarily bad. The kid could just be kind of imitating mommy. So I don't think it's inherently bad. I think when kids get in trouble is when they kind of step beyond the boundaries of what's needed. Like if they get too bossy or they don't know how to pull back and be a kid again. Am I on the right track here?
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, I think those are all relevant points. The first one I hadn't thought of, but that absolutely makes sense. It resonates with me. My mom had a daycare in our house, and I was I phased in and out of different roles with the younger kids myself. Mostly I was indifferent because I'm just like, they were just invaders and they literally would sleep in my bedroom for nap time. And I would come home from school. You know, you're a teenager.
It would smell like sticky snacks.
You're 14 and you just want to go to your room and get away from the world. And I'd go downstairs and someone's in your bed. And it wasn't like there was anywhere to go because the living room had kids and, you know, because our house wasn't that big. And so I don't know what I did. I think I just, but I have this
in the backyard.
I have this heartbreaking memory of my mom didn't inform me fast enough. And I kind of barged in my room. It's my room. I barged in my room and there was a kid. Oh, it just breaks my heart, Rebecca. There was this kid, this cute 4-year-old kid who was in deep sleep and just gets jolted out of sleep because I barged in, and the kid looks at me with such fear and terror because I'm this tall, towering guy, you know, and I was so pissed off about it that I just went, ugh, you know, and closed the door. But it breaks my heart, Rebecca, to think about this kid and like, I don't know. It makes me want to cry just thinking about
You're the scary one.
Yeah. Well, and the look on the child's face is like burned in my brain. This innocent, defenseless, and because the kid doesn't want to sleep in my room, you know, he wants to be anywhere other than the big, scary grumpy teenager's bed. He would rather be anywhere else. He'd rather be home with his parents. And he's alone and in this strange place. And I barge in and he's just like, and it kills me, Rebecca. This
Did he come back? Well, he probably had no choice. He had to come back.
Right. My mom was she was the only daycare in all of Sammamish Plateau, which is a huge area. And then another daycare opened like mid-career for her, but 2. So it wasn't like people had choices. And my mom was a genius when it came to kid control. I mean, she was a master at making kids feel comfortable and behave. I mean, some of these kids would come into the house with like extreme problems behaviorally. My mom would, you know, get them into shape very quickly. Anyway, so what I'll say to you, Lorraine, is that you're observing your 3-year-old son who is acting like your helper. So it's hard to know exactly what I would see if I were to observe, but to go off of your phrases, you're saying that he acts like your little helper at your day home, and he acts like he's in charge of the younger kids. And so it's hard to know what that means. The key is, how does he experience it? Because if he's being helpful and he likes being helpful, and he also kind of likes being the bigger brother of the younger kids, then there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem happens when a kid feels forced emotionally.
Right. And they can only do that thing.
Right. But the problem is if you've subtly pressured a child, unbeknownst to yourself, to be in charge of stuff like that, then you can't ask them and gauge their response and understand what's going on inside them. Because if they're like, no, because once you parentify a child, and you stop parentifying a child suddenly,
They can't go back.
they will react with anger and hurt and fear. So it's hard to know, but if I'm sure, Lorraine, you know your 3-year-old son well enough to intuit what's going on inside of him. So just going off of a behavior of he's being helpful, that doesn't necessarily mean much, but just try to figure out what's going on inside of him.
I mean, the other parenting thing is, does she need him to do that job or does she not? Because sometimes kids start doing jobs because they have to.
Right.
So has something come up where he feels like he has to take a more adult role? And, there's a lot going on in the world right now where kids are either regressing or feeling like they have to be really adult and then regressing again. So those are my big thoughts of the moment.
Another email from patron Orla from Ireland. She says, could you provide some tips on preparing your firstborn for the birth of a new baby? My toddler will be 2 years old when my second baby is born. How can I prepare her for this? Rebecca, what do you think?
Oh, see, I haven't lived through this. I only have one, and I am an only myself. So, oh boy. So really, if you can just explain that the baby is going to be something that needs to be loved for and cared for and modeled that for the kid. Most kids kind of fall in line and do that. Sibling rivalry is also natural. And I know in some families it's much more traumatic than in others. So again, with kids, it's good to focus on the positive and not spend too much attention focus on when they're doing it right. So actually, I'm not talking about preparing at all. I'm talking about in the moment. But there's definitely books on kind of siblings and what that looks like. And I've heard people say to the kid, you're always going to be the big brother. And some families really bond and some families don't. I mean, some siblings hate each other.
Yeah.
And I don't always blame the parents for that. I mean, there's just dynamics that are kind of beyond our control.
Yeah. So the key is once the child is born, that the child's needs are being met attachment wise. When a child feels fulfilled, attention, love, attachment, security, entertainment, then the sibling is just an interesting addition. When the child is not getting those needs met, then that's when they turn on the child or blame the younger child and resent the younger child. So, but you're asking, how do you prepare? And getting a book is one idea. The other thing that I see people do is give her a role in lieu of our previous conversation. Don't put pressure, obviously, but as Rebecca's saying, you're going to be a big sister, and kids like to have roles. They like to put on adult shoes, if you will, or big girl shoes, and I can do that, and feel some sense of competence. And if you make it fun and like she's going to be a success, then that's good. But again, within reason, right? Because you don't want her to have a majority of her competence and self-esteem through just being helpful to you as a parent.
I've also seen a real focus on material, like trying to make it even materially. So like, the baby's going to get all this presents. Oh, the older kids should get presents too. And I will just say, in my experience, it's okay if the older kid doesn't get a ton of presents for becoming a big sibling. There's a way in which modern parenting has become really materialistic, and kids will pick up on that intention that it was just, kind of a secondary thought.
Right.
To get the older sibling a present.
Yeah. An empty, it's almost kind of like a blow off, if you will. It's just like, I don't want to hear your feelings. I'll buy you this thing to shut you up.
Yeah.
The other thing to prepare you for, Orla, and maybe you have, is when the baby is born, or even around the time, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to have extremely low availability especially in the very beginning, to your toddler. And so this is why it takes a village, right?
Mm.
Because if you have other parents, um, grandparents, this kind of thing that are already attached to your child, then it makes that so much better for everyone, better for you logistically, and also emotionally better for the child. Because if the child has only you and then suddenly has none of you for maybe months or very little of you for months, um, then that's going to be rough for the child. So you have to have several attachments for children. And this goes back to our conversation with Encanto of perhaps a better model of raising children is with all the extended family in the house or nearby or, within contact. And this is why I'm biased because I never moved away from Seattle, but I feel like people move too much, and you become isolated from extended family and attachments potentially. And I feel like we need to, as Americans in particular, really acknowledge that that's a cost, and maybe it's worth it, but I feel like people don't consider that. They get a job somewhere, or they just want to live in another city, and then they have kids and they're just like, oh crap, I'm all on my own.
Yeah, and especially with the pandemic, I have a client who's going to give birth real soon, and we're talking about, can she pod up with another family? What would that look like? Because it is too much to do it alone. And I love the quote about having multiple children that, when you have one, it's 2-on-1. And when you have two, it's 1-on-1 if you're co-parenting. And then if you have more than two as co-parents, it's a zone defense. And so, right,
I didn't know you knew what a zone defense was, Rebecca.
Oh, I play basketball. I know what a zone defense is.
Oh, I didn't know you played
box
basketball.
out.
Oh, that's right. You were a short guard, right?
I was horrible. It was just something to do. I just moved towns, and I was a senior playing on the junior varsity team. Like, it was really just something to fill the time. So yeah, there is a lot of need for people, and especially with a newborn, your time. One of my friends said, having more than one kid, it's not 1 + 1 = 2, it's 1 + 1 = 11. So your time is going to be really held by this newborn, and we all know how much attention a 2-year-old needs.
Yeah.
So who can be around to help with that?
Yeah, I mean, the fact or the very strong speculation that I think of that really typifies this point is back on the African savannah 100,000 years ago, mothers didn't have birth and then wander off into the wilderness and live by themselves, right? They stayed in their group, in their tribe, in their kin, with their kin, and you were within visual distance at all times with aunts and uncles and cousins and siblings and grandparents, and the whole community could, see you as a child, whether you're a new older sister or a newborn or a new parent, at all times. And we live in a society now where, as a new parent, you might literally not see another human face in person for months. If you are a single parent, you live by yourself, and maybe you work at home or you don't work at all or something. And I just don't think that is conducive to our needs, which I find to be quite obvious. But people, engineer their lives to isolate, to make it cleaner, to make it more convenient, and then, but our emotional lives are being compromised in the process. I'm not saying you have to stay in contact with your parents if they're abusive or something. I'm just saying that you need to find a tribe. You need to find kin.
I mean, here in Seattle, there is PEPS, which makes fake tribes, and ours is still together after 18 years. And yeah, I mean, the first thing it became was a babysitting collective where it's like, who can sit whose kids? And twice when the second baby came, I was either with the first baby or the second baby. You know, you need that extra set of hands. And I heard something that in tribal cultures, as long as it wasn't where, anyways, babies tended to be spread 7 years apart in a nuclear family in the tribe so that the next baby could be cared for by the older sibling. So I'll just say this, that having two babies under two is its whole own thing.
Yeah.
It's a tremendous amount of work. I just watched my neighbor do it, and you know, you're going to be hella exhausted and do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. So more than preparing the sibling, you know, what are you going to do? Like order some food, buy some clothes ahead of time for the big one, get some babysitters or some friends that you can pot up with. Know that your house is going to be a mess, and that's okay. Like, it's not easy. That to, you know, any amount of kids under 5, that's your whole life. And I'm all wishy-washy thinking about this because my kid turns 18 tomorrow.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. So that baby time, it's its whole own thing.
Well, he's turned into a fine young man.
Yeah. Yeah. We haven't really talked about the current Omnicore pandemic, but man, are the kids freaked out and not going to school, and they're not shutting down schools. And every day it's just like, okay, honey, here's your N95 mask. And if you don't feel like going to class, you don't have to, because it's not safe and everybody's positive, and we'll just figure it out later. And I sure hope you can graduate, considering that you haven't gone to class.
Yeah.
Because you're scared. They're terrified. The kids are terrified.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah. I can't imagine. With the, you know, Omicron spikes to unprecedented levels in the United States and around the world, it's pretty easy for me and Stacy to lock down again. But we don't work outside of the house anyway. So essentially we just stop socializing in person and going to restaurants. And although that's a huge bummer to do again, I hope that in a month it'll be over. But anyway, you can't, in podcast land, you can't see this, but Rebecca has turned her camera to a different view of her painting. So she sees my face, but I see her painting.
You saw my face for the first hour.
She's sort of doodling and with watercolors, I believe. And it's been fascinating to see this. It's sort of designy art, and there are these figures that are developing before my eyes. So, and it just makes me wonder if our conversation is affecting what's happening to her.
No, this is my Omicron coping. Like, I just realized lockdown number 3 is getting to me bad.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And probably because it's like Eli's birthday, and it's just like, oh my God, how sad to have had 3 teenage birthdays in lockdown. And so I've just been painting a lot. I've just set up my setup so I can paint.
He hasn't had 3 birthdays. His 2 birthdays ago, we weren't on lockdown yet.
It was pretty close.
No, we didn't lock down till March at least, if not April. So I'm not saying I'm not saying things are good for him. I'm just saying, I was like, wait a second, 3? No, it has not been 3. There's no way he was locked down in January of 2020, but
it feels like 3.
It does feel like 3. Let me ask you a question, Rebecca. Mm-hmm. One person was yelling at me on YouTube because I used the word tribe, because that is cultural appropriation.
No.
What do you think about that?
I don't. I mean, what else do you call a group of people that lived together?
Yeah.
All of our people are tribal people.
Yeah.
up until 200 years ago, there wasn't a single ethnicity that wasn't tribal. And as Jews, like we call ourselves the tribe. Like that's one of our prime words.
Right.
So
Yeah, I agree. The word tribe is not solely used by Native Americans. It's, in fact, that when the accusation was first bestowed upon me, I was like, huh? And the first thought I had was, are you talking about Jewish people? Because Jewish people sometimes call themselves the tribe. What is happening? Yeah. A tribe is a word for a human group. It's like,
yeah, I mean, it would be fascinating for both of us to look at how our peoples are both tribal people. Like, what is Japanese tribalism versus Swedish tribalism? And what is Jewish tribalism, across the continent? Like, I know for myself that I was not so long ago a member of a tribe. I had a really interesting experience over Christmas break. I was outside of Zihuatanejo, Mexico, which is one of my favorite places on the planet. And we were in a tiny town called Barra de Poci, 350 families, no, 150 families live there. And because of this area of the world, most places don't have windows, they just have screens. So you hear everything constantly that's going on. And I was like, some like intergenerational memory really touched off in me. And I was like, oh, not so long ago, my people lived like this. Like, everything your neighbors are doing because like sound travels, and like, so one person would be singing for a while, like karaoke. And then when they finally stopped, someone else would start. Like there was this way in which the community kind of dealt with the fact that there wasn't really any auditory privacy.
mm-hmm.
And this idea now that like I have neighbors, I'm looking at their house right now. I've said 4 words to them in the past 2 years. I mean, part of that's pandemic, but like we don't know each other in most of the US. You don't know your neighbors. So I could see how people have lost the sense that they are tribal people, but really this is who we need to be to get through. I mean, this is all you and I ever talk about.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a product of a number of things. Like I said earlier, it's convenience. It's so much more convenient to just have complete cutoff from people around you because you don't have to deal with their crap, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also, it's a sign of class. If you are living in a home with a bunch of people next to another home with thin walls with a bunch of people, that is a sign of low class. This high class is the mansion on the hill, the Citizen Kane, if you will, and you're beautifully adorned, and you have this giant mansion with all these rooms, but you're alone, and you don't have any contact with the nature of our nature, which is human contact, and so I think those are driving, and in a materialism as well, which obviously is tied in with class, and also the mobile nature of Americans. I think in particular, very few people live, and it sounds bizarre to even think of someone in the United States having an experience like this, for people to live several generations in one town, or even on one street, right? Whereas around the world, that's common, right? That you live in the place you grew up, and on the very street that you grew up, maybe, and therefore everyone because you grew up with everyone, and everyone knows everyone. Whereas in the States, like people move on average every 3 years or something, sometimes to completely different states, and so this constant churning of newness makes it really hard to develop long-term trusting relationships with people, So and then I think there's also a suspicion, that Americans have of neighbors and whatnot. I find that there's this automatic assumption that like your neighbors are up to no good or something. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I have had that thought. If you are on any of the neighborhood postings of everything that can go wrong, I often think like, can't we just expect the best of each other?
Right.
Like we're all doing the best we can. But there was a study that came out probably 10 or 15 years ago now that in the 70s, the average American had 7 close friends that lived in their town. Now the average American has 3 close friends, and there's no guarantee that any of them live nearby.
Right.
So this fractures our society, right? It fractures what we can do and the support that we have. And if something really goes wrong, can somebody take your kid for the afternoon? Can somebody pick you up from the hospital?
Yeah. I find
we're
that
really missing that in our lives. I mean, there's been times I've called you and you have come right over.
Yeah.
You've heard it in my voice. And you're like, I'm on my way. And
well, so along those lines, Rebecca, it's been a while since you've been on the podcast, since you've been out of town during December. I don't know if you want to talk about
I'd love
your familyness of the time you've been gone. What do you want to share?
Hi, everyone. So I'll just start the story at the beginning. So in Chicago, in the inner city hospital from the 40s to the 60s, a group of doctors decided that if you had your tonsils out, you should then be irradiated with radiation. So in the 70s, they started following those kids. My mother was one of those kids. All of those kids have had strange, rare cancers of the face and neck. My mom had a cancerous tumor in her sinuses 25 years ago, and it was quickly dealt with, and she had radiation, and there's been some long-term stuff, but she was pretty much okay. During the pandemic, she lives in Florida, she started to have all these weird symptoms. She thought she needed a root canal. And because the medical system in Florida is basically collapsed, she couldn't get any treatment for like a year and a half of having all these weird symptoms. So she finally gets into the dentist, and he's like, I can't help you. You have a huge cancerous tumor in your face, basically. And so that's what they figured out over the next.
Where was it?
So your sinuses are real big. I don't know if everybody wants to go Google a picture of your sinuses, but when you have a sinus headache and like so much snot comes out, like you can't believe that you're holding all that snot in your face.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I get that about once a year. I call it snot disease, where it's just all day long. It's just gallons of snot coming out of my nose. It just never stops. I'm like, this is so weird.
So all of that space on the right side was filled with a cancerous tumor.
In the cheek,
but in the cavity.
Yeah.
But it had gotten so big that it was pressing on her eye. They didn't realize this till they got in there, but it was like it had grown into her jaw. And it was pressing on her nose so hard that she was having these massive nosebleeds that they couldn't control. So she had a 14-hour surgery where luckily the tumor, it was a type of skin cancer. So this is usually a skin cancer you'd find on the outside of your skin. And I actually have been treated for it twice. But it was on the inside of her face. So it's growing somewhere completely unexpected, but it's a shallow tumor. So that probably saved her life. So they took out, oh my God, so much of her face. They took out both.
So you went down to Florida to be with her.
So we kind of went in shifts because of COVID. So I was there for the post-secondary infection, second unexpected stay at the hospital. They had to take out the whole roof of her mouth and they replaced it with skin from her leg. And that whole skin graft failed. So she couldn't eat. Her diabetes went through the ceiling. So she has no teeth on this side. It's the bone that's there is made up of leg bone. And then the time that I was there, kind of unexpectedly, they were figuring out how to get and developing a prosthetic for the top of her mouth that basically is the top of her mouth, because otherwise there'd be a big hole.
Hole to where? To
her nose.
To her nose.
As if you have a cleft palate, right? It was as if she had.
I fell down the stairs when I was 2.
The stories I've made up about you all these years.
Oh, really? No,
Yeah.
yeah. I fell down the stairs and I had a bunch of stitches right here.
So it's basically like she had a cleft palate, and that the her palate was the top of her mouth was no longer closed. And it's amazing how many things you need that closed palate to
Yeah.
do.
No, no, no. I mean, you don't have to convince me of the function of, I don't want to be able to have my tongue go through the roof of my mouth into my nose cavity. Like
Mhm.
you
Just
don't have to
limit.
convince me of the function of needing the roof of your mouth.
So you can't eat, you can't talk. There's just a bunch of things.
So emotionally, do you want to talk
Oh,
about what you're going through?
it was rough. It was really rough. I mean, you see your parents one way, and showing up at the hospital, I had to help her bathe. Um, she could barely talk. There was a lot of like interpreting what she was saying, and it was funny. My wife, who's been with me for 25 years, was saying it was amazing to watch like how little we had to say to each other for me to know what she was saying.
Hmm.
And getting to know the nursing staff over 7 days, and there were days we walked into the unit where you could just tell, like, due to COVID, there's nobody here, there's not enough staffing. So some days, like, we were changing the sheets. So it was like full body care for my aging parent.
Before you went down, you were telling me, if I'll cut this out if you don't want me to include it, that, you know, as with a lot of people, you have a complicated relationship with your mom, and you were really, I don't know if ambivalent is the word, or had a lot
Yeah.
of conflicting feelings about uh, what was going to happen, and even the fact that you were even going in the first place, right?
Yeah. I mean, it actually helped that she was at the hospital because the time gets condensed and I didn't have to be in the house. So I think that was actually like a very strange blessing. And I was probably able to be way more present, because we would be in these like 2 hour intensive times, where you're cleaning up. I mean, I don't know if you've been with someone who's been in the hospital for a long time, but those rooms just get trashed. There's like medical equipment everywhere. There's like, two huge feeding setups, and then you realize you only need one. And like, I mean, it just became our job to just clean the room up every day and entertain her for an hour and help her take a shower. We were there the first time she ate liquid food in 3 weeks, and that was pretty amazing. So it was both incredibly powerful and definitely one of the hardest things I ever did. One day my body just gave out and I couldn't go to the hospital. I just had to stay in bed. And since I've been back, I've been like, I need more sleep. My body's just like trying to integrate everything that happened.
I mean, you didn't know if your mom was going to live.
Yeah, my mom was in surgery for 14 hours. They took off, I mean, it's like bionic woman stuff. Like they took off half her face.
Yeah.
She has a titanium plate in her face, and her jaw, which has no teeth, is made up of her leg bone. Like this could not have been done 10 years ago. Like this is serious stuff.
Can she eat and talk now?
She's working on it. I mean, what's funny is our relationship. I know she's okay because our relationship is kind of going back to normal, which is that she only writes if there's a crisis or she has a new poem. So like that's what, like, oh, she's feeling better. So I think she's doing okay, but she's really having to sit with her own mortality, and she's got like cancer-sized medical bills, and we're sorting that stuff out too. And caring. I mean, I'd love to hear from people around the world, but in American culture, like we are in charge of her putting together a team to care for her. Whereas the doctor that we had was from Canada, and he was just shocked that there wasn't like another service at the hospital that set up aftercare at home. So definitely, like so many people sitting in the most broken medical system, looking around, being like, I can't believe this is how we treat each other. Like, this is so messed up.
Was it overall positive bonding with your mom? I kind of hear that.
Yeah, yes. But I think, I was having to see her in ways that I don't think anybody wants to be seen as that weak or that needy.
Did that help with emotional bonding?
Um, it I could really be in a role of service as opposed to like she also couldn't speak, but like she did tell me I was walking weird and that my hair was too bright.
Your hair is too bright?
You missed it. I got a really bad dye job and it was way too orange.
Uh,
I knew she was gonna say that. So like there was some ways in which it was like, oh,
you
she's still
walk
my mom.
funny? She said you
Yeah,
walk funny?
yeah. She was like, "Are you okay? You're walking funny." And I'm like, "You have the half of your face is a prosthetic, and you're worried about the way that I'm walking."
I mean, is that common for her to?
Yeah,
Yeah. So the fact that she struggled with talking helped in that department.
I think so. Yeah, and that our role was really clear, and that her life would have really sucked if we weren't there, because otherwise you're in these hospital rooms alone, and your nurse comes in once every hour or two to poke or prod you, but there's no one to talk to or clean up the room or
Did she appreciate it?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And appreciate you?
Yeah. I think so.
Wow. Did you expect that?
Yeah. I would hope. I mean, if she didn't, I would have just left. Like the amount of sacrifice that we did to get there and be there. And having Beth be a lawyer and be able to like read these contracts with the long-term care insurance and tell them what they needed to give us. Like I was like, oh my God, everybody needs an elder care lawyer in America.
Like what? What was the?
You pay a lot of money into these services and then you call them and you say, hey, it's time for me to use this service. And they say, oh no, we don't do that. And then you have a lawyer sitting there who's like, actually, I have the contract right here. I can photograph the point that says
like what would be one of the points?
like, do you get round the clock care when you get home?
Because of insurance? Is that you're talking about insurance?
Yeah.
Or? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the contract said they did pay for round the clock care, but they were claiming they didn't because they were trying to get out of paying. What insurance is it?
It's long-term care insurance. I can't remember the name of it. But
okay.
They're all bad. I mean,
it's a specific insurance for long-term care.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. You ask anybody who's at this stage of life caring for their parents, unless they've got like boku bucks and they're just doing it themselves. You ask anybody who's interacting with long-term care insurance, and they'll probably quickly turn to tears. Unless they've got someone like Beth who can actually sit there and read the contract and read it back to them. It was pretty amazing to watch. I mean, my wife is a powerful lawyer and she's usually doing it for other people. And she got to do it for my family. And it was like, damn, look at you go.
I know. Like, I mean, I've never seen Beth operate like this, but I can see it. But I've been around lawyers and seen them operate. And I don't know if Beth is like this, but my observation of competent and successful lawyers along these lines is that one, they do their research. Two, they have very precise points that they keep hammering on. Like they know how to articulate, because there's an argument, right? And for regular people like you and me, Rebecca, we get emotional and
we're like, oh, no.
Yeah, we'll be like, yeah. But to the lawyer, they might be emotional, but they stay precise. They have this precision of I'm reading the clause right here and and they just stick with it. They might say it different ways. And the other element that I would see is a force of character, this intimidation, frankly, of
right.
I'm angry and I'm invested and I'm dedicated and I'm not going to back down and I'm not going to lose my cool. And if you don't give me what I want, this is going to escalate. There's that kind of there's an intimation of that, of you screw with me and this is going up the ladder. So deal with it now, and you don't have to say that if you're a good lawyer. You just have that air around you, like, don't screw with this person.
Well, and also I understand the rules. Lots of people can make this call and be like fumbling around. but I'm actually playing at your level and potentially above your level.
Yeah.
And I would just hear these people kind of crumble and be like, oh, yes, yes. I mean, first, I think it's their job to first say no.
Right.
Which is really awful.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a really stupid system. It's because
it hurts. Like, hold on, I have to rip a piece of paper and do another watercolor. It hurts people at their most vulnerable.
Yeah.
Which is, my mom is sick. And I can't do this 24/7. I mean, there's another part of this too, of like, this has been women's work through the pandemic, is they have taken on these impossible roles as, these places have gotten closed or their kids' daycare closed. It's like some woman is doing that job that someone else would get paid for an 8-hour shift to do. And now she's doing a regular job and doing that job too. And so I was just, I'm looking at, and people are saying to me like, Becca, you should stay and do this. And I'm like, I can't stay and do this. Like this, her health stuff, her discharge date was changing every single day, which meant like another call to this entity or that entity to see if we get the services postponed. And it was like, it was a full-time job, just managing getting her out of there. And thank God there was two of us. So like one of us, I'm doing the bathing while Beth is calling the long-term care insurance for the 1200th time. Like, I see why people crack under the stress of the system.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, that's by design. They, I'm positive that if you were late on your premium payment and you didn't know where to send the money, they would have a team of people there to answer your questions right away, and it would be very seamless,
Right. They would drop you. Yeah.
Well, but my point is that if it has to do with their money, they're responsive, they're clear, they're reasonable. But when it has to do with spending money, suddenly there's these forms and this process, and there's the no's and all that stuff, and it's a terrible system.
Good policies like my mother's don't exist anymore. You and I could never get this level of care paid for by insurance.
So long-term care insurance is something that you get earlier in life. Like, yes. Obviously you can't just sign up for that when you're in the hospital getting surgery on your face, right?
Yeah. She's been paying into this for decades,
knowing that she would be there eventually.
Yeah.
Are her and her people suing the government for irradiating her face?
This is fascinating. So to handle my stress, I did a deep dive into all of this. And they attempted to sue in the 70s, and the hospital was able to prove in the 70s that the radiation was the standard of care for the time. I don't think that would work now, because even I would give the argument, like, if it was the standard of care, why wasn't this happening all over the country? So yeah, one lawsuit was filed and they lost on that technicality. So there's like 2,000 kids that were impacted of this that they've been able to track. And my mom is one of the long-term survivors. And she believes it's because they left the treatment early because her father was injured in training camp for World War II, and they went down to Alabama to be near him. So she didn't go through all the treatments.
So there were multiple radiation treatments.
Yeah.
Not just one.
Yeah,
multiple.
I can send you the study if you want to read it.
And they were doing it because they thought it would assist with the recovery of tonsillectomy.
They thought that they would make sure the tonsils would never grow back. That was their goal.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny with like all the Omicron stuff and you and I being so pro-vax, and, I understand why people distrust science.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there
stories like this.
Well, okay. I mean, for every one of these stories, there's thousands of stories where science went right. And this was in the 70s, this was
in the 40s through the 60s.
This is the 40s. It's a long time ago. We didn't. So yeah, that would have been potentially the standard of care because they didn't understand radiation sickness and as well as they did later. And as far as I know. And
Well, and also
I
what
think
I
people
can't
would
figure
literally
out is,
just, when they would do an x-ray, for example, people would just stand in front of an active x-ray.
right.
They wouldn't even like take a picture, right?
Or my
Uh,
mom said that they used to measure your feet at the shoe store with an X-ray
oh my God.
and shoe radiation all the way through your body. Um,
Right.
so yeah. Um,
So for
yeah,
that
but
reason,
I'm
it was the
super
standard of
curious why
care.
this study, it's in my family, it's called the study, but it wasn't a study. Why this protocol at this hospital was allowed to go for so long. And now everybody connected with it is dead. But there is a guy that specialized in researching these kids. And he's randomly in Vancouver, Canada. And I was able to talk with him, and he put me in contact with someone else, another long-term survivor. So that was really interesting because the cancer that my mom has, there's a 1% chance. I mean, it's so rare that this cancer would be inside her head.
Yeah, I
So
would say I mean, you could never know if it is causal, but I'm sure it raises the risk. I mean, there's a reason why we don't do that anymore. There's a
yes.
reason why we limit the amount of radiation you're exposed to. It's because there's a correlation. The more exposure, the more of the risk.
Yeah, and actually she is not getting radiation or chemo afterwards because she's a second time cancer survivor and already her face had been so irradiated with the treatments. So at 80, they're saying she'd be better off not getting radiation. And they believe they got all the cancer. And the cancer doctor was really amazing. I mean, what he was describing to us as things were failing, he was describing why it had happened and the amount of nerves he had to cut. I mean, my mom has a scar from her ear down through her jaw. And that's because, not to get gross, everyone, but all of that was lifted up so that they could go in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is no joke.
So overall, worth it, the trip? Not like worth it, like I went to Hawaii, it was so worth it, but like emotionally.
I really helped out. I gave my aunt a break. What Beth was able to do was totally unexpected and absolutely amazing and will serve my mom for the rest of her life. So I would say complicated, unexpected, exhausting. And then there was the whole COVID thing on top of it. I mean, we're wearing masks. People are heckling us, yelling at us. One person, I wouldn't get close to her. I was in this really long line. And she was yelling at me. And I was like, look, I'm here caring for my mother who has cancer, who's got a secondary infection. She's in the hospital. And the woman yelled back at me, well, my aunt has cancer too. And I was like, then put on a mask. Like,
God.
I'm going into a hospital.
Have you seen Don't Look Up? Have you seen the movie Don't Look Up?
No, I'm avoiding it. I can't do it right now.
It's all that. It's the whole thing. If I had seen Don't Look Up, as I said when Berto and I reviewed it a while ago, although I don't know if I've actually published that episode with me and Berto talking about it, but I would have said, this is ridiculous. Now, no. I mean, there are certain things where I'm like, okay, you're scared of vaccines, but to yell at someone for wearing a mask, you know nothing about what their situation is. You know, there were people wearing masks before COVID for legitimate reasons, right? And so oh, golly.
Yeah. So adding that stress on top of it, like there was this time.
What did she say?
She said that her sister had cancer.
No, but what did she say in the beginning? What was her opening line?
I was like, she's like, you can get closer. And I was like, no, I'm keeping my 6 feet. You don't have a mask on.
This is an employee or?
No. This is in like a long line in an airport.
And you're standing behind her, giving space. And she turns around and says, you can get closer. Even though it doesn't impose on her that you're giving her space.
No.
Doesn't inconvenient. There's no reason why she needs to speak up.
Right.
She's starting a fight essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that happened a lot. Like we wouldn't get into elevators with people who were maskless and they would like tisk at us. And so so because we didn't know where my mom was staying, we didn't know when she would get checked out of the hospital. There was one night where we had no idea where we were going to be. So we're trying to pick a hotel. We're like, driving around kind of dazed. And we're in Florida where there are these like huge hotels. There's no hotel like this in Seattle that like basically is just, could be a city. Like it's just so big. And there was one, the reviews were good. It looked like it was nice. We thought, okay, we'll go there. So we drive up and there's just a huge turnaround. And there's all these people walking around without masks. And we just realized now we're stuck in this huge turnaround and we can't stay here. And so one of the bellhop guys can tell that we're like kind of freaking out, and he approaches the car and he has a mask on. And we say, look, we're here to care for someone who has cancer. And he goes, oh, you can't stay at this hotel. We go, oh yeah, we know. We know, but we need to like get out of this like traffic jam. And he's like, oh, let me clear space. And he cleared space for us like off to the side so we could just like sort it out. Like, okay, where are we going to spend the night? And
What'd you do?
We found another hotel. It was much smaller. That place, the night shift did not wear masks. But
seems like a motel would be better because the door would be the outside.
Pop in and out. Yeah. I mean, we were also in Florida. Like, who knew? Lots of people want to be in Florida when it's gorgeous and sunny. We had some things to figure out, and we didn't have all of our faculties. We're jet lagged. And
so when you stuck up for yourself about the mask, were you calm or were you livid?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was too exhausted to be livid. And I would have
been livid.
Really? I don't think that though, but I don't know if you've ever been this tired in your life. There was this time I was in the pharmacy getting my mom's glucose strips, and the people in front of me, I don't think they knew each other, but they'd escalated very quickly to talking about like, if I don't get my needs met, I'm going to shoot someone. And I was like, whoa, I'm just putting my headphones in because like I can't go there. And the one guy he looked just like
they were arguing with each other.
No, they were enjoying each other's company, talking about how quickly they would shoot someone. It was like a discussion you would imagine in a pharmacy in a movie making fun of Florida, but it was like actually happening. And one of the guys is dressed like kind of like a Tommy Bahama commercial, and he's carrying a small Pomeranian in the pharmacy. Like he was just like, am I in a Coen Brothers movie, or is this actually happening? Okay, this is actually happening. So I've got my headphones in because I'm like sleep deprived and delirious and on like some other planet where I've just washed my 80-year-old mother. And so when I realize, oh, it's my turn, I take my headphones out so I can talk to the pharmacist about what I need. And like, luckily, when I get to the pharmacist, I have my mother's telephone number and her address because I'm picking up a medical supply, not for me, and I don't have her insurance card. There's like so many hoops at this point. So, but I hear the guy with the Pomeranian who's not wearing a mask and has just spent a lot of time talking about shooting people say to the pharmacist, hey, how can I get a COVID test? And the pharmacist, you can see, like, has to breathe real deep to this maskless man and say, hey, so those arrive at 6 a.m. and they're sold out by 6:15. So you can come then and get one, but we don't have one sitting here for you. And you can tell the guy with the Pomeranian is all like sulky that it would like take any time out of his day to get a COVID test.
Yeah, great. So obviously he has symptoms and he's walking around maskless and yammering with strangers. And we wonder why millions of people have died from this around the world.
Yeah, it was, having lived in Seattle, I came back real thankful that this has been, I've weathered it here where people are so protective of each other. And
it shows in the stats. Yeah. Seattle, Oregon, California, much lower rates of death per capita and infection per capita than other places in the world.
Yeah, when I was in Florida, it was 780 per 100,000. And I think here it was a third. We've been a third the whole time. So I'll be going back in.
Not that we don't have our doofuses in Seattle,
Yeah,
because
right.
we do.
Yeah. So I'll be going back to Florida in late February, and I can give another installment about caring.
Well, I'm happy for you, Rebecca, because I mean, I think I am anyway, because before you left, you were all kind of doom and gloom about the whole thing.
Yeah.
I think justifiably. And what I'm hearing is that it wasn't all doom and gloom.
No. And I got to see the manatees in their natural habitat, and that was amazing. Yeah, I mean, being there for family at the end or in the crisis, that's a growth experience.
Yeah, I bet.
You learn a lot about yourself. And I also learned like I could collapse for a day and the show could go on and I could show up the next day. Here, I'm going to show you the painting I've been doing while we've been having this conversation.
Yeah, I'll try to verbally describe it to the listeners. Oh, okay. It kind of looks lemony, avocado-y with Christmas hats in a sky. That's how I describe it.
These are definitely Florida colors coming from Seattle. It was like, oh my God, it's so bright here.
Yeah.
Everything's so fresh and alive. Aging in America is something we haven't talked about much on the podcast. And I think as we age, it'll be interesting to see if we talk about it more. And I'm clearly heading into that stage of life.
Yeah.
Where I'm launching my teenager and I'm caring for my aging parents.
No, all of us are. Berto, Bob, me. It's all midlife stuff that I'm guessing will can continue to come up on the podcast. All right, Rebecca. Well, what's the final word on today's episode about Encanto, parenting, and parenting your parents?
Well, I would say what I learned from Encanto is the message of who you had to be in your family isn't necessarily true. You can be someone else.
And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because why?
Only you can prevent forest fires. Only you can care for you the way that you know that you need to be cared for.